Good morning, everyone. For those of you who may not know who we are, I'm Wei Love. I'm a program manager on the Outlook Extensibility, and I have with me
Petra. I'm Petra Ronald, and I'm also a program manager on the Outlook Extensibility team.
We're going to talk about what's recently new, what's coming soon, what's on our roadmap a little ways out. We're going to do a couple demos around some APIs and newer functionality that we see coming down, but then the majority of the discussion today, we wanted to actually hear from you and hear what you guys were working on, what challenges you guys were facing, so that we could think about that as we're going forward with our planning. So in terms of what's new, so API requirement set 1.5 is supported across all desktop clients, and within the next month or so should also be supported on Outlook Mobile. API requirement set 1.6 is supported in Win32, so that's Outlook Desktop, and OAuth for business users. We also officially GA'd Centralized Deployment, for those of you who may not be familiar with that. Centralized Deployment, I can show you here, is the way that we now recommend that you can go about and deploy add-ins within your organization. So for an admin, if they click on their tile and they go to the admin center, under settings, if you select services and add-ins, you can choose to upload an add-in. So if you follow through this dialog, you can choose whether or not you want to select an add-in that's for in the Office store, or if you already have an XML manifest or a URL that points to a manifest to install. So if I just go forward with this, adding an add-in from the Office store, I'm shown the store here, and I can select which add-in I want. So if I were to select, let's say, Office at Work, next, and then with the centralized deployment options, I'm able to select whether or not I want the add-in to be available for everyone, specific users or groups, or just me. So for specific users or groups, I could type in a DL or a specific user or list of users. And once I were to do that, I'm just going to click everyone. I can click Save, and it will go ahead and install the add-in for whoever I've specified. All right, so the second thing that I wanted to show you in regards to the add-in installation flow is the updated Office store. So we changed the UI a little bit. It will now show tiles, this nice layout here, that makes it a little bit easier to find the add-ins and add them. So we've been doing a lot of work in terms of our management and our APIs. That's what we've been working on lately. What's coming next? We're continuing to work on our APIs. So we're going to expand requirement set 1.6 to Mac Outlook. A lot of this work you'll see is in Mac Outlook. We're going to add pinnable task pane support for Mac Outlook and OAuth for business. Detected entities, which is the contextual activation of an add-in through the use of regular expressions, matches, or known entities such as an address. Single sign-on for Mac Outlook, and then add-ins enabled for Gmail accounts for Mac Outlook. And what's on our roadmap? Again, we're still really focusing on our APIs, and the reason why we're doing this is because we're working to close the gap with the COM. So if you are experiencing gaps that exist today, please let us know so that we can investigate those scenarios and determine how best we can support them. So for set 1.7, we're adding APIs such as recurrence. We're adding some events around recipients, appointment time change. We're also providing the ability to access the from address. We're going to be adding single sign-on support for MSA accounts. Admin reports, which will allow administrators to view the usage of the add-ins within their organization. We're also working on Delegate Access, which Petra will demo for you shortly. And then we're going to be exploring just new extension points that may be useful for developers in the future. So with that, I'll hand it over to Petra for her to do her demo on Delegate Access.
Yes. Okay, just 1 second. Okay, so what is Delegate Access? Basically, add-ins aren't currently available in shared folder scenarios. So I'm logged in as this administrator, and if I want to share my inbox, I go here, and there's a lot of permissions I can give to other users. Currently, those other users that I've shared my calendar or a mailbox folder like an inbox to, they can't use their add-ins. But with this feature, they'll be able to. Another scenario would be when an admin sets up a shared mailbox like sales@microsoft.com. Currently, users can't use their add-ins, but with this feature, they'll be able to. And I want to make it clear that the add-ins that will be available will be whatever user is currently logged in. So right now, I'm logged in as the administrator, and I have access to my manager's inbox. But when I access my manager's inbox and their items in the inbox, then it'll be my add-ins that show up. So first things first, one thing you have to do in order to make your add-in available in these shared folder scenarios is add a manifest change. And you're going to see here I have support shared folders set to true right underneath desktop form factor. So only add-ins that have that set to true will be available in these shared folder scenarios. So as you can see, I'm here, I have all my add-ins, but when I go to my manager's inbox, I only have the add-in that has that support shared folders element in the manifest. So the second part of this feature is an Office.js API that we've created that is get shared properties async. And when I run this, I get the owner. And so I'm in my manager's inbox, so the owner is going to be the manager. We haven't done this yet, but you're going to get the REST URL and EWS URL. And this is really important because to make EWS requests and REST calls, what you're using right now would be the mailbox.rest URL or mailbox.ews URL. But that's not, you can't use that in delegate access scenarios because the administrator's EWS endpoint might be different from the manager's EWS endpoint. And so you really have to check if an item is shared. And if it is, you have to use these REST URLs and EWS URLs that we give you. This API also returns the permissions that a manager or that the administrator in this case has for that item. And it's a bit masked, so you can just run it. We have you can tell which permissions that user has. So I have owner permissions on this current inbox and for this item, and so you can check if I have read permissions, write permissions, and there's a lot of different permissions that you can give to a delegate. And so that's all for delegate access. I think the next demo we're going to do is recurrence. Should we stop and ask questions, or?
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts around delegate access? All fine.
Yeah, I want to.
All good.
Okay. Yeah, one thing I think that people have brought up is custom properties. They're worried about custom properties, and as long as the delegate has, or so in this case, the administrator has read permissions, then they'll be able to read custom properties, but they have to have some type of edit or write permissions to set custom properties. So that is one thing that people have asked about. Okay, so for recurrence API, basically, when you set the recurrence of set a recurring series, you have to go to this dialog, and then you can set the start and end time and duration. And there's a lot of different variations of the recurrence pattern that you can set. So you can set a daily recurrence pattern, weekly, so every Monday, and monthly on the 17th or 21st of every month, etc. But basically, we've tried to keep this API as similar to this dialog as possible. But this API will allow you to set the recurrence pattern as well as get the recurrence pattern of a meeting or an appointment. So we're going to go over here. 1 second. So let's set a monthly recurrence pattern. So we've set a monthly, and it recurs day 17 of every month. And the way to do this, we have specific properties for a recurrence. So we have the recurrence type property, and that, like I said, that's going to be daily, monthly, weekday, weekly, and yearly. And so based on that type, your recurrence properties are going to change. So for instance, my recurrence type was monthly for this specific demo, and the recurrence properties are just going to be interval, which is 1, so it recurs every 1 month, and on day 17, so we have day of month, remember. If you wanted to do it a different monthly way, you can see that the recurrence properties are going to change because, so if I want it to be every 3rd Monday, which you can see here of every month, so the recurrence properties change. So the day of week is now we have a property called day of week, and it's now Monday, and week number is the 3rd. So depending on your recurrence type, the recurrence properties of the recurrence object is going to change. We also have a series time object, and we've made that object so that you can create or set the range, so the start date to the end date of the series, as well as the time of the actual appointment. So if it's at 5 p.m. To 6 p.m. And so you set the duration as well. And you can kind of see that here. So another thing that I want to mention is that to set a recurrence object, to set the recurrence pattern of a meeting, you can't set it on a single occurrence of the series. You can only set it on the series item, so it's like kind of like the parent item. And for that, if you can still get the recurrence pattern on every meeting if it has one, but if you need to check if it is a single occurrence of that series, we have an API called Series ID, and that Series ID will give you null if it is a parent item or the series item, and it'll give you the actual item ID of the series, so you can actually open that meeting and that series item if you need to, and to set a different recurrence. Yeah, and that's about it, I think, for recurrence demo.
Okay, so if you guys are wondering how we figured out that we were going to target delegate access and recurrence, well, that came from our user voice forum. So delegate access has been something that's been requested for a while, since especially on shared mailboxes, users weren't able to leverage the add-ins that they necessarily wanted to when doing their daily workflow. And for recurrence, there is a REST API that exists. The challenge is the amount of time that it takes for you to be able to get that information from the server. So that's why we've gone ahead and taken the route of also implementing a JavaScript API. So, with that in mind, we wanted to hear from you all. What have you guys been working on? Have you guys been hitting any pain points recently? Have you been hearing some very strong feedback from your customers? What would you like to see or have us talk about in these upcoming community calls, since this is our first Outlook community call? Oh, yes, unmute. I unmute the chat.
Anyone? It's a small group today, so it'd be great to have a discussion. Eric says, I would like to see the master categories list added to the API.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your scenario specifically, Eric?
Just from the point of view of being able to allow the user to choose from all of the existing categories that they have in their mailbox so that you can apply it to an email. Currently, I have to go through a roundabout way of getting the master categories list through Exchange Web Services. I believe it's in a folder associated item. But it's been actually quite a while since I wrote this part. It does work, but it's a very roundabout way, and I believe in some cases, accessing FAI items is not supported, so it's probably going to break at some point. But just like the Outlook object model, it has easy access to the complete list of master categories with the colors and everything.
Yep.
And that's not exposed at all in the graph.
So is that something your add-in relies on specifically? It allows the categories to be set?
Yeah.
Or,
yeah. And a related thing that I would like to see to be able to easily access is a complete list of all the folders in a user's mailbox. That can obviously be done with paginated EWS calls, but it takes quite a while and it returns so much information. But really just a list of the folder names, folder paths, and the IDs all in one call would be as a top level property in the mailbox, or the would be very beneficial for filing purposes if you want to build a solution that's filing to folders, and if you need to display a folder picker or searching for folders kind of thing.
Okay.
Especially because if the user has thousands of folders, that call can take quite a while.
Yeah.
And many users do have thousands of folders. I will put those requests into user voice as well. I should have done that a long time ago.
Yeah. We actually, at the end, I'll show a slide that talks about some of the ways that you guys can communicate with us and provide us with feedback ongoing, not just in these calls. Margin, looks like you're asking for some events allowing the code to run when a new message gets created by a user. So is that the only event you want, Martin? Or do you want more events in there?
Sorry, I'm actually eating, so that's not really nice. Just finished. That's the most important one, I'd say, allowing us to modify something in the message that gets created, like inserting pieces we need to insert before the user actually sees it. So it would be something that you would have to be careful of, that the code that runs doesn't take too long, so that we don't destroy the user experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I guess you know the scenario I'm trying to solve.
Yes. Anyone else? What about anyone else? We've gotten some requests for different types of events recently, but I'm curious. So this, when a new item has been created, has come up a couple times. Are there any other types of events that people would love to see in terms of being exposed?
Well, I could imagine that the same would apply when an item gets sent, but I'm not even sure. I didn't check the documentation if that's in the plan or already there. But it would be obvious that if guys want to do something when the item gets created, they may want to check if everything is still okay once the email gets sent before it actually gets sent.
Yeah, so the piece that we do have, I think the link was just shared, was the Outlook on Send. So that is an extension point, which will allow you to potentially block on send. The note that you should think about when looking at that is that if you add that extension point type, you actually can't submit to the store today. And that's because it has the ability to block send. And that can be a little bit invasive for users.
Yeah, get that, yeah.
Okay, so we have events, we have categories, we have being able to see the folders that users have.
And the attachment stuff, I think, is on the way too. Attaching inline or attaching with passing in the file directly.
Are you talking about from Compose or Read?
From Compose.
Compose, you want to be able to attach. You should be able to attach an inline attachment today.
Yeah, but it doesn't work if the URL of that attachment points to a public URL. It needs to be passing in the file as a, for instance, base64. Otherwise, it will not work for enterprise scenarios. We cannot risk a company using a RADIN and attaching a file for that attachment to actually be publicly available just for a few seconds. It has to remain within the domain that it's running, so therefore we would have to be able to pass it in through our API by passing it really in and not by referring to it.
Mm-hmm. So attachments has also been one of our more requested things that we're going to start looking into. And as we get more clarity on that, we can kind of come back to you all with some questions and some of our thoughts around it as well.
Yeah, please. I think that the what shall I say, as a in-house dev, there are different requirements than an ISV would have. And as an ISV, you have to really look at the data protection or security, and having data flowing around in public spaces just because the API requires it breaks completely a scenario, and it certainly has for us. So if we want to do anything with attachments, which is a very strong field or a very high demand field, we need an API that will secure or give the customer the security that whatever they attach doesn't end up on the internet somewhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Looks like Paul had a question. Is there an organization scope store that can be used for add-ins instead of submitting to the public store, similar to the organization scope for actionable messages? Okay, so the short answer is no. The only place that we have to publish or add in today is the public store. But then my follow-up question would be, Paul, is there a specific reason why you wouldn't want an add-in listed in the public store, and you would want it only listed in an organization scope store? Because I'm thinking in my mind, we have this centralized deployment where an administrator could go ahead and kind of install an add-in that was disabled by default, potentially, and the user could go and enable it. Would that work? Is there something special that adding the organization scope store adds, do you think?
They want to upload it as a file, though, or a URL. The organization could also do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just go back to my line of business. Systems of users in a different org using it won't work. Right. Okay. So if it reaches back to my line of business system, so having users in a different org using it won't work. Right. So then does that mean you have to provide a specific manifest? Are you making different changes within the manifest specifically, Paul? Oh, I was saying, is the manifest different? Like, are you making special configurations for each organization you're saying? I guess I'm trying to understand exactly, because you say you don't want your processes to be seen.
Yeah, you could. So in central deployment, basically what that does is allows you to an organization to add an add-in via URL or a file. So I guess if you have a URL for that add-in, then an organization specifically could deploy that to all its users, and you wouldn't have to validate it in the store, basically, or enter it into the store.
Can you share a link to that?
Yeah. I can also show you what it looks like. Again, we went through it briefly, but let me see. So we went through this briefly before, but it's under settings in the admin portal, and you go to services and add-ins, and then you go upload add-in. This is kind of like the process for it, and then you can say I want to add it from the Office store. If you don't want to go that route, you can have the manifest file or the URL for the manifest file. But if you want to do it through the store, we added Office at Work last time. Oh, it's already added, so let me go back. To Evernote. How many add-ins have been added? Just 1 second. Let's go. So then next, and then you can choose if you want everyone to have it, specific users or groups. So you can, do sales, a sales group specifically, shared mailbox, or you can do yourself. And you can search for specific users as well. So that's kind of one route that you could take, and just have a URL pointing to the manifest or maybe a file that the admin has, and then they can go into the portal and upload it for everyone and deploy it to everyone.
And here is a link that talks about centralized deployment a bit more in depth. It's from when I believe the announcement of it being in preview, and it walks you through the steps and tells you where it's supported. And then there's additional a link to documentation about centralized deployment as well, and how you can publish your add-in that way. Martin says security groups need to be unnested.
I can explain. There's a few requirements that you have to fulfill, like federated AD if you have an on-site AD, and then the security groups you use to assign add-ins cannot be nested, so you cannot have a security group, and in that security group you have a different security group, and in there the users they have to be on the top level. So there's a few pitfalls, but there's nice documentation there that explains it. You just really have to read through it. Hope that helped.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And Simon, you can't hear anything?
If you give me a sec, I'll actually post. I'll paste the documentation URL.
Okay.
So.
All right. So, are there any topics that you guys have maybe been developing and added and you'd like us to do a deeper dive into in our next call, like maybe single sign-on or some new topic?
Anything you're having trouble with?
Yeah.
In developing it? One.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Well, SSO is something we're just waiting for. It's super important. We always get this feedback from enterprise customers that every single click is awful, and SSO really just eliminates it. For us, yes, SSO is not super simple. I mean, the whole auth is not the simplest, but once you've figured out how it works, it's basically just a necessity that SSO becomes available. So for us, we're only waiting for it to become available.
Okay, so what we'll do is there's a PM on our team named Sohail, who actually is the PM who was behind the kind of SSO, so we'll maybe get him in the call next time to kind of walk you guys through in detail the SSO flow and how to get it set up. Any other topics that you guys would like to hear about?
Maybe you mentioned the best way to get in contact. We have now started, based on feedback from other teams, to really put everything into user voice and into Stack Overflow. User voice more for the gaps and Stack Overflow more for the inconsistencies or bugs. Is this going to be the same for you guys, or have you got different channels you would like us to to put the stuff into?
Voila.
No, so user voice is definitely the right way to go to provide us if you want new features and functionality. For development-related questions on Stack Overflow, if you use the Outlook Web Add-ins tag, you should normally hear back from someone within a couple of days. We normally have someone checking it regularly. So those are the best ways to contact us if you're you're experiencing a bug, an issue, versus if you just have a new feature request. In terms of things that we would love for you to try out, we would love for you to try out our APIs that are in preview. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with our documentation, but what we've started doing in the last 6 months or so is as an API is completed, maybe in a specific client. Here, let me pull it up. What we've started doing is going ahead and listing our available add-ins under preview. So we have a preview requirement set, and what we do is if an API has been completed but hasn't been completed across all clients or has yet to be assigned into a requirement set, we add these APIs under the preview section. So what could feasibly happen? Since we work in Mac, Win32, Outlook on the web, and mobile, you could have something that becomes available in Win32, for example, but isn't yet available on Mac yet, that you can actually test out before it's officially included in a requirement set. So as we're working through requirement set 1.7 with the recurrence API that Petra showed, for example, those APIs will start to be documented under this preview section, and you're welcome to try them out. The other things that we'd love for you guys to take a look at are adding support for add-ins on Gmail, and the other piece is the single sign-on, which you guys just asked us to give you a more in-depth look at in our next community call.
One question maybe on the single sign-on thing. I think you have been heroes in the past by backporting a lot of APIs to earlier versions. What's the goal for single sign-on? How far back is that going to be implemented? Can we expect that to go to only be in the current version, or are you going to backport that into older Outlook versions?
So we've stopped backporting our APIs after, so basically requirements at 1.5 and above. We're no longer backporting any of our APIs to Outlook 2013 or Outlook 2016. By Outlook 2016, I'm talking about the MSI version, the click-to-run version. We'll continue to get the updates as we move forward. The reason why we made that choice is that it becomes, in order for us to move forward and give you guys all the features and functionality that you would love to see as the platform keeps growing, the more that we have to take features back, the less progress we can make in terms of adding new functionality. So the short answer is single sign-on will not go back to 2013, and it won't go back to 2016 MSI.
Okay, that's fine. Got it. Just as a feedback, I think a lot of usage you got out because you did backport and then you really opened up to the developers an existing market, and by only delivering to the current version, you have to wait for the market to build. And I'm fine. You know, we're used to both. I was just interested in knowing what the single sign-on specific scenario will be, because it impacts every single developer that actually wants the user to sign in, and therefore I saw high value. But it's fine if you just bring it now and then keep it on for the future. So good to know.
Okay, and Simon asked, are OST files going away? So say yes, please. So I'm not super familiar with OST files. email messages. Oh. You know, I actually don't know. I don't work we don't work specifically with the Outlook client team, so we'd have to follow up with them. I can't even venture a guess one way or the other. We'd have to look into it. Okay. All right. Well, we can at least share that back with the Outlook client team and see what they have to say.
So Eric says the OST files are essential for caching mailbox content locally. How could Outlook work without them? Nobody wants to use online mode all of the time.
That is true. But I think this is a conversation between Alec and Simon.
Yeah. More typing. No more typing. More typing. Okay. And while Simon's typing, any other questions you guys have, feedback you want, requests you want to make while we're on the call today? No? Okay. Oh. Outlook client is connected to Office 365 is online only. Okay.
I'm not sure that that's true. Okay, great, Martin.
Perfect on the user voice. Okay, so oh, sorry, that's not true. Oh, from
the Outlook client connector. Yeah, I don't think
Outlook.
that.
Yeah. Eric, do you want to elaborate, or Wade, do you want to chime in? Oh, Simon says yes, but we turn off cached exchange mode. Okay. Eric says, I have many Office 365 Outlook profiles using the cache mode. It creates big OST files and their profiles are big.
I think that more this is feedback that needs to go back to the Outlook client team, which we're happy to take back.
Okay, and is there somewhere, where is the best place to also provide that feedback that they see it online so that they can put that in there directly?
I might have to, I think there's a user, I think there's a user voice, but I don't think it's all like the Outlook developer user voice. Outlook should have their own user voice link. Let me see if I can find it.
Okay, and if not, we can get back to them and, yes, create one. So Simon's issue is that they're in an education setting with 5,000 plus students and staff. But there are options for mailbox size and quota management that can help reduce the sizes of the OST files if you're using cached mode. So that's something to check out, Simon. Thank you, Eric.
One more thing to add, sorry.
Please.
there, of course, is the option when you're setting up cached mode, how far back you want to keep the data in the mailbox. That's one of the first options that you'll see when you configure a new mailbox, right? You want to keep just last week's mail available, last month's, the entire year. That will go a long way to reducing the sizes of local OST files, in addition to mailbox quota management policies and that kind of stuff. So I can't see the OST file ever being removed because people are going to want offline usage, obviously. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. Hopefully, Simon, you can check that out, and then if there's other issues, then come back on user voice, or we can reach out to me, Wei, or Petra, and we can help you with that too.
Yep, and I just added a link to in general, the Outlook feedback. You can provide it per client, and then you can add your feedback there.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything else you guys have questions on? We have another 10 minutes or so. No. Okay, well, thanks for joining today for our first Outlook call. We'll post the blog within 48 hours along with the video, and then we'll tweet that out when it's available. And any other feedback, we'll provide some links in the blog that will help with today's call, as well as in general the general Outlook user voice and the preview APIs, centralized deployment, and all the rest. And we will look forward to talking to you again in a few months.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.